Thanks for joining us, Pippa.
You're so welcome. Thanks for having me.
So, for those who don't know, Pippa is a psychologist and author. She was part of the World Cup 2018 team with Gareth Southgate. Yeah, pleasure to have you here with us today.
Yeah, vice versa.
We were just talking off air, weren't we, about one of the interesting things about your work. Most people think of or look for resources about underperformance. How can I do more? How can I be better? How can I grind harder, grow? You have something called overperformance.
Mm.
What do you mean exactly by that?
I guess the framing that I would offer is that overperformance is when we're sort of, it's like a form of psychological overreach where we are so committed to a particular way of doing things that we've stopped feeling. We've stopped actually relating to what we're doing and stopped relating to life at large and to each other. My premise is that we don't have to achieve less, but there's a different method required. So, the arc of the book I just wrote, Life Reclaimed, is about moving from overperformance to regenerative performance. And I think that overperformance is sort of symptomatic of us losing connection with what we're doing. And it's kind of like revving in one place and relying on grit and gas, both of which are useful, but when they're overlived and overused, they become damaging.
You see that a lot with the corporate side.
Mm.
People are earning 100, 200, 300 grand a year. And for the outsiders, they look at that person and think, oh, I wish I was doing that. But that person inside is very unfulfilled. They haven't got any work-life balance. They probably don't even like their job that much. And they are continuing to overperform, um, when they maybe should look at another angle of what success means on a collective basis, possibly.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not sure I would say it was directly causally related to how much a person earns, or because I see it in all sorts of different people. But it's a way of being that it disconnects you from what you're doing. So, some people can be earning plenty and not feel that because they're really aware of what it is that they're doing and why, and the narratives that they're living by, and the mentalities that they employ, and the kind of practices that they bring into their life are fulfilling for them and keep them connected. And some people are at the other end of the scale, who you would imagine striving and sort of sleeves up, get going kind of thing might feel really important, but they're not finding what's rewarding in it. So success feels just out of reach for both ends of that. Yeah, but there's a lot more in common between people uh, overperforming all sorts of, financial status and different demographics and different things that they do with their life.
Do you think the why then is the most important part of it, the driving factor that underpins the actions beneath it?
I think that the why is really important to understand, but not dwell on. I'm a pragmatic person as a performance psychologist. I'm interested in what is it that we do differently that changes the thing that's not working. So it's important to understand why we do it, so that we can change it, rather than just stay in the abstract. Why do we do this? It's like that's why my proposition in the book, or my invitation in the book, is to sort of not just skim over and start doing something that is a new habit, build a new habit, but actually understand why you're doing it, because you can untether a little bit from it then, and then start moving into the practicalities of, okay, there's a lot that I have agency over here that I can do differently.
Could you split the issues down into the four cultural narratives, don't you?
Yeah, I mean, I start the book by talking about what it is that we understand, what's our sort of, what are the deep stories that we live in, and those, I think, really lead to our mentalities, our performance mentalities. They amplified by our life histories in different ways, especially if there's trauma. And they lead to a sort of set of behaviors or a way of being, a way of living that sometimes gets a bit unexplored, and we are sort of committed and bored in it. But the four narratives that I talk about, which I hear your work talk about quite a lot too. It's an interesting sort of connect. But the sort of first one is the idea that us as human beings are separate from all other life, separate from all other species, separate from everything else. And that separation, which many better scholars than me have examined over time, that sort of separation allows us to um, just kind of trample over everything else, trample over our relationships, and actually trample over ourselves too, to a great degree. So when we feel that we're superior, when we feel that we're not really attached to this world out there, um, what happens is that we think the weight's on our shoulders to get it all right. Um, that separateness also involves us feeling like we can press override on our own systems. So if we think our mind is in control of everything, we'll completely dismiss the body's intelligence, and all the signals that we get that we're revving too hard or that this isn't working, isn't fulfilling, and we just keep going because those narratives are so strong of like, yeah, but you're the superior one here. You need to be able to own it all, manage it all, keep everything moving, and it's on you. So I think that separate narrative is a really big problem on multiple levels. Um, the second one is exceptionalism, or feeling like we have to constantly stand out, be special, be strive to be the one, the hero, the all of those narrative arcs that are about us being special, and that starts right from schoolishness, and kind of always improving, but complete betterment towards specialness and exceptionalism. And I mean, even the maths doesn't work out in that, right? For collective well-being and flourishing. Third one is optimization, that idea that we can't waste a minute. You have to optimize everything in life constantly, including our leisure, our recreation, um, you know, our relationships. Every part of life is now commoditized and optimized. Parenting, anything you like. And I think that leaves us in a constant sort of push and rush state. Urgency is a primary driver when you feel like everything has to be optimized all the time. There's no space. Um, and then, the final one is sort of this narrative that the point of life is to get more, to be more, to get more, to gain, and to have this sort of linear trajectory to this illusory finish line. And those four together are a really seductive, heady mix for how we choose to live. And if that's the sort of water we swim in without ever really thinking about it, it shapes mentalities in us that feel like our own, performance mentalities that feel like our own, and they become behaviors, and that's how we find ourselves living without and feeling kind of something's a bit dull, something's not quite fully alive in me, and I can't find what, and then we try and fix ourselves. And I think it's much bigger than the personal fix. It's kind of like, let's have a look at the ocean we're swimming in here, and then understand what it is that we can do differently.
There's so much to unpick there. I think what we'll do is we'll go through them individually, and we sort of have a little bit of a deeper dive into each of those areas. So first one was separateness, wasn't it? Do you think that's because of the arrogance of humans? So I'll give an example. Humans think they're super smart, and we all think we're God's gift essentially. But nature design systems that everything works together. The defecation of an animal is then the food for plants, and we breathe out carbon dioxide. The trees breathe that in and give us oxygen, for example. You mentioned about trampling on other people and being separate. Do you think that's the issue? Is that we don't sort of live in alignment with the whole process? We're just thinking about this more, as you said in one of the other parts, and that has having a detrimental impact on us collectively as individuals.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. I think as well, the arrogance doesn't come from, it's not random. It doesn't come out of nowhere, right? And I think arrogance or hubris is not something we've intentionally chosen, but it's built up over a long period of time of believing and assuming that we're separate to all else. But we're a living system. I talk in the book in Life Reclaimed a lot about moving from an industrial mentality to an ecological mentality or mindset, and that's um, you know, everything works in a system. Everything is connected. The sort of principles of ecology, no waste in nature, lots in human nature. Everything's interrelated. Change is inevitable. Diversity is necessary to flourish, and everything runs on energy, right? So that's the same in a human being. It's the same in a human mind. It's the same in a human body, and a human is part of an ecological system. But we've forgotten that to some degree. We've sort of stepped out of that, and we look at it as if nature is something out there rather than we are nature. And actually, we work the same way. And that's what I'd like to invite people to turn their attention to again. Like, oh, how do I actually work? How does this actually work? So we're not separate. And arrogance, I think, which goes a lot with a more fragile ego, comes from that idea of like it's on me, it's up to me. It's, I'm better, I'm different. We're not really. We might have extraordinary, magnificent capabilities of the mind, and of assessment and of critical thinking and of ability to make meaning that we don't yet know which other beings can do that. I'm not saying they don't, but we don't yet understand it fully. Um, so how do we use that well, instead of how do we just kind of assume that's just all about us? Then we're still always going to be part of a system.
Yeah, everything's a system, ecosystems, etc.
Yeah.
And the thing is, people have this belief that we need to climb the hierarchy and we need to be more and more separate from things. Yeah, we need
Mm.
to be this person at the top of the pyramid and everyone else is beneath us. But actually, a good leader is actually in service of the group. So they're at the bottom of the pyramid in some respects. They deal with the worst and shittest things to deal with, essentially.
Yeah.
And they're the ones propping people up, whether they're the head of the household, head of a business. They, although they are seen as the top of the pyramid, in some respects they're the bottom because they're doing all of the things
Mm.
that are the most important. So maybe in that sense we are looking at it in the wrong way. Actually, that we can make ourselves more part of this collective rather than being a separate authoritarian figure,
Mm.
whether it's in business or whatever,
Mm.
and being part of this collective nature, whether it's nature on the whole or the nature of a business or a system, as you said. So how do we go about changing that mindset, do you think?
Well, I think that there's multiple ways to go about changing that mindset, but the first thing to say is that the foundation of the hierarchy, the foundation of a pyramid, is the strongest bit, right? We're constantly looking for the apex in our mentality about what being great looks like, but the foundation is the strongest bit. So it's like there's a amazing researcher, writer, philosopher, Philip de Scola, who talked about the Great Turning, which was the sort of the beginning of the understanding that humans were separate from all else was an error that has repeated multiple times across our cultures, and that has had us sort of constantly feeling that like this type of person is better than that type of person, whether that plays out in racism, in class, in gender, any way you like. And so superiority became part of what we believed we needed to strive for, and that we, was inherent in some and not others. But it was the turning away from nature and ecology that started that. So I think the first piece is to just remember what we are, before we start thinking about who we are and how we live. Or, I mean, they don't have to be sort of linear in that way, but it's like, we are mammals, amazing ones, but there are many amazing ones. If you look at the tree of life, we know now we're not actually at the top of the tree of life. And there are many more agents and beings that are extraordinary and doing extraordinary things that we don't quite get yet. But that re-inhabiting the world as part of the living system instead of stewards of it or masters of it, mostly that the latter is the problem. We have to just come back to re-inhabiting, and it can start really small with thinking about how what kind of relationship you have with the world, with other people, with places, with landscapes, with other beings, what kind of relationship do you have? Or are they abstract concepts and the you is just in your mind? I mean, I'm a eco-psychologist as well as a performance psychologist. So for me, we are always in collective. We are always enmeshed in the web of life. And there's no meaning without that, really.
I like what you said about as well that this type of person is the best type because you could be or you could have the assumption that being taller is better.
Mm.
Yes, it's good for basketball and certain other things, getting stuff off the top shelf in the supermarket.
Yeah.
But for jockeying,
Yeah.
it's a
Right.
bad thing.
Yeah.
So it really depends on what your strengths are and how to fit into the right ecosystem or system.
Niche. Yeah.
Yeah, as you said, and I think that's a really good point. Is that this is seen to be the best type of person nowadays? You must be, you know, extrovert, charismatic. You must be X, Y, and Z. But
Scholarly, yeah, etc. Rich, whatever, but I think that forgets our common humanity. There's a phrase I really love from South Africa, or a concept called ubuntu. I don't know if you know it, but ubuntu is a concept that basically translates as "I am because you are," and I think that relates way beyond human beings. So in an ubuntu philosophy, um, that idea of superiority or separation is dismissed, and it's if you don't thrive, I don't thrive, and kind of the idea of sort of if I find myself with more resources, then I'll build a longer table, not a higher fence, and if I find myself with um, additional uh, harvest, I'll share it in my brother's belly, not store it for myself.
yeah.
Because if we're not thriving, there's no point. Because I'm part of this collective, and we've moved so far away from that for all sorts of reasons over hundreds and hundreds of years of sort of philosophical thinking and Cartesian thinking, and we can take it right back. But the thread that we've dismissed the most is our connection to the web of life.
It's in reciprocity as well, isn't it? People have
Right.
got this assumption that if I don't give anything away, I get to keep more.
Yeah.
But it actually doesn't work like that. That's
Doesn't work.
just
Yeah.
scarcity mindset. If you give
Scarcity.
stuff away for free, information, I mean, even drug dealers know about this. You give stuff for free, and then that's how life works. You have to give something to get something back. A business such as Amazon, the reason they're so successful is because they can get things to you the next day
Mm.
at a good price. Return policy is great. They're giving a good value that then allows that business to grow. So you have to give in service to each other, to nature.
Yeah.
Feed food into your brother's belly, as you said.
Mhm.
You have to be able to do that.
But there's the bit I would challenge on that, Jevon, is I think we kind of stop at that idea of exchange between people for personal gain. So, like, okay, I'll pay Amazon because they're going to get it to me quicker. So it's kind of like still self-interest. And it's, even though self-interest has got a place in survival, it's like, what happens if we extrapolate out? So there's the me, then there's the we, that's perhaps our community or our humanity or a team or whatever. And then there's the us, that is planetary life and all of us. And if we're not actually thinking on the three levels, we're not really flourishing, or it's an illusion that we're flourishing. It's going to bite us at some point. So, Amazon, as an example, is potentially, you know, the opposite of flourishing because it's so extractive in some ways. But it looks good at that first level. Like, we've got to go further down though. Like, how does this lift generally? How does this serve everybody? How is this actually reciprocal, and expanding the idea of reciprocal rather than just in my self-interest? It looks more like service. So
I think it comes down to as well identity. If you say, "Oh, I'm from Leicester," or my Leicester clan is going to fight the Nottingham clan or whatever it may be,
mm,
and then it might be race wise, it might be from this country then, and then it's from Europe, and then it's from the world. And I think that's one of the issues we have. We don't look at ourselves as a collective as you said, on the wider scale. We look at it in small niche pockets that then has that effect of, well, we're not going to look at collectively working together. We're going to just do it for the people in Leicester or in the East Midlands or in the UK. Whereas there's a much wider uh, benefit to society to look on a much larger scale.
Yeah. And to your point before about scarcity, if you think that I've got to get my slice and not share it, otherwise I won't have enough. If that's your foundational sort of mentality, like gathering more, if it's coming from your narratives, that's how you're always going to feel. There's another piece I would add to that is like as humans, um, we have lost touch with community and the sort of hyper-local nature of lived community a lot. And I think there's great benefit in reconnecting with that. So we can, from our sort of ancestral heritage, we don't actually 10,000 people is too much to think about. We need to be thinking about 2,000 people. And actually, in a lived sense, probably no more than 20 people in a tight community. The problem is when our nervous systems are overwhelmed constantly, we're in that rush, push, um, survive, scarcity mentality. We dismiss everything else, me and mine. And I think there's a lot of room to sort of understand that our commonality is much greater, not just in a respect kind of way, but in we actually need all of that to lift for flourishing, for sustained flourishing.
And people do say, charity starts at home. Yeah, I get that. But Kant talks about the categorical imperative. If everyone in the world did the actions that you take, would it be good? From a moral standpoint. And I tried to think like that now. If everyone did this, would it be good or bad net for society?
Yeah.
Imagine everyone had £10 and everyone stole £10 versus everyone giving £10 to everyone in the room, they'd all still end up with £10. But
Yeah.
one is a taking and one is a giving, but you still end up with the same net position of everyone has £10. So I definitely think it's a psychological thing. What was the second one? Optimization?
The second one was exceptionalism.
Exceptionalism.
Yeah, which is sort of that, comes from that term schoolishness. Or that's a way I find easy to think about it. It's, the constant sort of betterment towards getting to a position where you're seen as good and standing out. We look at people in society who we laud, who we hero, who we find worth celebrating, celebrity and celebration sort of thing. Somebody who we feel has done something or has something exceptional. That's become really over skewed. I mean, there's a role right through myth, right through story. There's always a role for the hero, but it's so dominant in our culture now of like looking for that. Do you need a break?
No, that's fine.
So dominant in our culture now of looking for that sort of standoutness and specialness. And that's why I think we've lost touch with what's magnificent about ordinary and everyday and commonality and common humanity. We're always looking for the special. We feel like not quite right unless we're standing on a pedestal. Actually, a lot of times in myth, the hero might contribute something good, but they're pretty lonely. They're pretty out there on their own. They suffer and sacrifice a lot. And I wonder if we've skewed that too much.
I think as well, exceptionalism is a lot of the time subjective as well. You could be national champion in sprinting or judo, and although it's subjectively good, for someone who is, a European champion, you're not good to them kind of thing, if that makes sense. So I think there is a difference between subjectively and objectively good. And
Yeah.
if you understand that, yeah, you might want to be this millionaire or whatever the goal is, that's your goal, but subjectively it might seem exceptional to you, but someone else it might not. So if we're always chasing this exceptionalism, maybe you'll get to that point and think, oh well, actually I need this. It's like the whole car example. If you're driving a Punto, someone in a BMW, that's what you want, but they might want then a Lamborghini and they might want a Pagani Zonda, whatever it's going to be. So it could be this whole chase and not feel that inner content possibly.
Yeah, and depending on why you want it, like if it's to be to head towards specialness, exceptional, stand out, be seen well. That's not necessarily a recipe for fulfillment, or for flourishing. There's absolutely no equation that says that. It's sometimes the opposite because you're then in the scramble and the chase forever, because it's based on somebody else's perception. So like understanding what are the values that you live by, and if you can govern yourself in relation to those values, maybe a bit more stoicism than Kantianism, that I think that that's where you get a little bit closer. There's nothing wrong with doing amazing things. I mean, I'm a performance psychologist. I help people do amazing things. But it's the why underneath and what it makes you feel, or how you relate to that. What's your relationship to that? Because if you think that then you've arrived, you're going to be disappointed shortly. Because it's only the internal fulfillment that will give you that.
I've definitely realised that recently, that it's the internal validation that you're after rather than external. The external one is hollow. I think you talk about deeper wins as well, don't you?
Yeah,
So
deeper wins.
yeah, so I think that is definitely something that I've come to realise, is that it's, if you're, as you said about the car, if you're buying it to impress your friends, your family, a girl, whatever it's going to be, versus you like driving that car or you want it for internal reasoning,
Right.
I think there is a big difference.
For sure.
Massive.
Absolutely. And it's not about, it's not that car is a symbol of exceptionalism necessarily. It's about the relationship. So if you can find in yourself, get really clear in yourself what you're about, what you value, then you're so much more likely to find some fulfillment in that. And it's not the opposite of succeeding or winning. It's all about the why.
What about the third one then?
Optimization. So that's the idea that there are no moments where you shouldn't be improving, optimizing, getting more efficient, more productive. I think that we've crammed we cram so much into life that's about optimizing and efficiency, that we've forgotten to leave some space for being, for proper critical thinking, for experiencing, and definitely for feeling. That's squashed. And I think that's that's just like absolutely an industrial mindset. Don't ever stop. Like, we'll make more, we'll push, we'll get better, and it's not human. It's taken, especially now in a digital and an AI age, it's taking us well beyond human scale. And I think we need to really consider like where the spaces are for, not for optimizing, but for other kinds of living.
Yeah, I've realised this recently for myself as well. I learned about something called the Jevans principle. It's no relation to me. It sounds similar, but it's not. I promise. I wish it was, but so it's based on the assumption that if you increase the efficiency of something, you should use it less. So it was done with steam trains, with coal,
Right.
and you would assume that if you make, use your car for probably a better example. Imagine you buy a new car and it's twice as efficient as the old car, you would assume you would save money. But a lot of the time, what happens is you end up doing more miles because it's cheap. You're like, oh, I'm going to go to Lake District this weekend. I'm going to go to
Yeah.
another trip here.
Mm.
And you end up, the consumption increases.
More. Yeah.
And the way I sort of extrapolate that to myself is saying, as I become more efficient, instead of it saving time for more time for me to relax and do other things, in fact, I end up filling the space with more things to do. Does that make sense with the time saving? So whether it's
Absolutely.
AI or, emails or whatever, and then it comes to the position of I'm doing so much more, but also the whole point of me improving that time efficiency was to have more time available. But now I've just filled it with something else that will then improve in time. So
Yeah.
that efficiency saving has actually not saved me the time. Well, it has, but it's made me input more stuff, which is kind of like the Jevons principle.
Yeah. Exactly that. And that's what I would describe as the industrial mindset. So, so the magnificent things about early industrial innovation and efficiency, we haven't taken it up in terms of like what else do. We've just, it kind of links with the fourth narrative about more. It's just push. We can extrapolate more, we can extract more. And we do it with ourselves all the time too. It's like I talk in the book about FOMO and like, fear of missing out. It's like, no, I could actually get more out of that holiday. You're on holiday, but your list of what you want to get through on that holiday is massive. It's like the 16 books you haven't read that have been on your bedside for 6 months, and all the places that you've got to tick off and see when you go to that place, and you're not rested at all.
Yeah.
And one of the points might have been to just put it all down for a minute and chill. But I think we've really commoditized so much of our life in so many ways that optimization we don't give ourselves a lot of permission to just not do.
on the more thing. So I'm selling I've basically sold it. I wait for the paperwork to come back through for my private number plate, my old private number plate.
Yeah.
And obviously, I said to my parents, I sold it, whatever. And they go, "Oh, you could have got more for it if you'd." And it's like I say, it's all about more. You know, I
Yeah.
could have got more,
Mm.
waited another few, but like I don't need it anymore. I don't want a private number plate anymore.
Mm.
You know, it's more of a young person's thing. I think possibly all of these sorts of things. But yeah, it is just such a underpin to people's mind. Oh, you got a new job? Oh, great. Are you getting paid more?
Yeah.
Not about what are you becoming here or what sort of skills
Right.
do you enjoy it more. These aren't the
Yeah.
first questions people ask.
Yeah.
It's, oh, are you getting paid more then? Well, what about the free time that I'm going to get?
Yeah.
Do I, like, as I said, I'm enjoying the job. I'm giving more to society. All of these sorts of things. It allows me to travel less. You know, I'm working from home now or more locally.
Mm.
So yeah, it is definitely the capitalist mindset in some respects.
Mm.
More, 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 more.
Mm.
Cut, cut,
Yeah.
cut, cut, cut.
And linking that back to the first principle of separation, the idea of like endless growth and endless gain, that just can't work ecologically. There's always a give in ecology. There's always a cycle or a season. There's never like a constant growth. There's periods, latent periods, or um, change periods, or transitions. We don't allow that in our own mentalities, our own narratives. Always, sort of keep going upwards, ever more, ever better, gain, gain, gain. It just doesn't work, as some of the sort of more contemporary ecological economists and people like Kate Raworth and donut economics are showing us that it's sort of like, there's limits, and we need to come back into the whole, into sort of the understanding of the collective in a way that's much more fulfilling for us. But um, in the second half of the book too, made me think about it with your number plate, and the idea of getting more. But the second half of the book, I talk about better reasons to perform. And I don't think any of us would say, well, not many of us would say that we regularly review why we're chasing, what it is we're performing for, what values does that anchor into, and whether that's still aligned with us now in this season, where you're not maybe at the age where you want a private number plate, like what's your reason now, or the new job, like what does it add to you value wise, not commercial value, not monetary value, but the rest of value, aspirational value.
It's like Bruce Lee says, isn't it? It's not daily increase, but daily decrease we
Yeah.
should be looking for. And the more thing that you talk about, I try and look at more now in a slightly different way. Instead of more things and more, it's more contentment. Because at the end of the day, everything we do is trying to be more content later on to an extent. You know, if we earn more, we think it will bring us more
Right.
contentment. If we're in a better health, we think, okay, I'm not going to have any aches and pains or as many. But people don't really think about the impact of the things that they're doing in order to get there. They look at it in a slightly different way, I think, than what they should do, possibly.
Yeah, and I mean that sort of idea of later, this illusory finish line that never, of course, never comes. I mean, if you actually step back and think about it, what we used to imagine was that you'd work till 65 or 60 or 65, and then you'd retire and die in your 70s, sort of thing, and you'd have this leisure period at the end that was you'd saved for, you'd provided for. But most people live in a cycle of debt now, and that's just feeling increasingly out of reach to people. It's time to really reconfigure how do we live now rather than wait for that later promise. And it kind of doesn't work like that for so many people anymore.
Have you heard of the fishing story? It's a really,
Oh,
really reminds me of that.
I think I know what you're gonna.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the guy who's fishing and he's fishing with his kid, and some like capitalist comes up to him. This might be a bastardization of the story, so apologise. And he says, "What? Why are you doing that?" He goes, "What do you mean?" He goes, "Why don't you just fish extra fish? Why would I do that? So you can sell it. Or why would I do that? So you can make money. Why would I do that? So you can do what you want. And what do you want to do? Sit and fish with my kid." So he's basically saying, well, why do I need to do all of that to do what I want to do now
Right.
anyway?
Right.
And I think that's a really good story.
I think that's beautiful, and that's back to my point of like, what is your relationship with life? Because sometimes actually there's so many magnificent, wonderful things in life, and we're missing them because we're busy chasing and gaining, and like pushing for the win or whatever, but with this idea that after that, once we've got that thing, we'll be good. And, life's now. There's only the present. There's, um, there isn't sort of that, there's absolute no guarantees about tomorrow. All you can do is govern today and stay in a state that relates well to life, yourself, your fellow man.
I was speaking to Harry Brightmore yesterday, the
Mm.
coxswain for the GB rowing team,
So,
and he was saying the same thing. So he thought that once he got this gold medal at the Paris Olympics 2024, that he would be elated, and he said he didn't feel anything that he thought. And obviously, you know this from working at a
yeah.
high performance
Mhm.
level, and he was more, or he was happier for his teammates having won the award than what he felt in the contentment for. So it's such an amazing thing. And another example is judo, um, where Craig Fallon won the world championships for England, for Britain, and he, after that, he's basically working in a petrol station, and he killed himself. And I don't know too much about the situation, so I'm just using my own lens to make a judgment. But I think that was part of it, that he thought maybe I'd done all of this whole life towards this goal, and afterwards my life didn't change drastically. I didn't feel any inner contentment, and also, I'm not this celebrity I thought I might be, that everyone cares and all this sorts of thing. The whole Streisand principle. It is a weird sort of situation, because you want to aim for these things, but at the same time, they're not going to bring you everything that you want, that you think it's going to bring you. It's a paradox in itself.
There's a couple of things that you said that I really love. The idea of sort of striving and ambition for achieving, I think is very natural, and I think is very. I love that about the human spirit. I wouldn't change that for anything. But what I'm asking people to consider is like, what are you ambitious for? Because if it is the trophy or the medal, it might feel a bit hollow, because it's not actually. You talked about the care. It might. The most rewarded athletes that I've ever worked with have found something in common with other people in teams, or found something, tested their mettle and felt connection to the crowd or to, the community in some way that's it's not the same as superiority and elevation, it's commonality. That's where the good stuff is, actually. Where you link arms and you think, I'm going to see what we've got here, and you can push, and it's not got that sense of loss or disappointment, or it's not a gilded cage in the same way as sort of individual glory that's just for me and the trophy. That's the hollow bit. That's the hollow crown, so to speak.
Do you think that's a difference with individual sports versus team sports? Is that by default you're already building this team and the relationships that maybe give you more of that without winning something, whereas in an individual basis, without the individual reward, it can feel a lot more like I haven't achieved anything. Yes, you've got coaches, yes, you've got people that you work with, but you haven't got that same common goal with a number of your friends or colleagues
Mm.
that maybe you'd get, or that you wouldn't get from an individual sport.
Yeah, I mean, I think in a team, there's more opportunity for it to happen naturally, of like that sort of shared endeavor. And in individual sports, maybe people have to cultivate it a bit more. But the lens still can turn inwards with an individual athlete to say, what is it about myself? As a, if you're performing at a high level, and especially if you're representing, what is it that you want to represent? Who are you when you show up on the mat? And what will you be proud of at the end of the day? And if it's conquest, it's temporary. If it's something about you overcoming, something about you being braver than you thought you could be, more vulnerable than you thought you could be, more willing than you thought you could be, that's wonderful stuff. And how do you process it? And how does it make you a more rounded, whole human being? I think sometimes in with sort of ideas of elite performance or success that looks like superiority, we kind of it becomes smaller, actually, and a smaller category, rare air up there kind of thing, rather than the thing we desperately seek, which is a sense of love. It's not the same as adulation. love, connection, representation, being in among it, that's where we thrive. But actually, sometimes when you take the superiority, or other people project superiority onto you, it's a little bit hard to find. And then transitioning out of that, like the young person you spoke about previously, the judo guy, that can be really drastic for the psyche. So, it's like if you know that was a chapter and you were testing your mettle, testing our common humanity for the greater good, that's something noble.
So it leads on to the mentalities then.
Mm.
Do you want to talk a little bit about some of those?
Yeah, I mean, some of the ones that I think are pretty strong in the sort of understanding of what those narratives lead to is kind of sleep when I'm dead is one of them. It's kind of I can't. I guess another way of saying that is like I can't let up, or I'll let myself down. And that's sort of taking away from wholeness again. It's a constant sense of push rather than space, and the room to be a whole human being. I think it goes alongside another one, which is kind of not on my watch. Where people feel like they need to be seen to be the one who can hold all the weight, the one that won't quit. You remember those sort of posters that people had in the 90s and on every office wall, or 2000s, sort of like never quit sort of thing. There was some sunset picture or whatever.
Yeah.
It's like sometimes you should quit. Sometimes quitting is a really good adaptation, because the cost is not working. Cost is too high, or there isn't a good enough reason to keep down that path, and a pivot's a better option. It's not the same as dropping ambition or dropping standards or not winning. It's a willingness, right? So a lack of rigidity into this one mindset, this one mentality. So I think that's one. You had another couple that you were.
Yeah, sunk cost. Well, you've basically just talked about that anyway.
Yeah.
Which I think is a really good one. Don't hold on to a boiling kettle just because of how long it took you to boil. Is
Yeah.
the phrase that always comes to mind.
Mm.
And I think that's one of the things that people get wrong. They might be 10 years down the road in something, and you use the word pivot. Sometimes you're now a different person. You don't like it anymore,
Right.
and you want to do something different. The problem is for a lot of people that want to do that is they are in this kind of trap where they've got a wife, kids, they're reliant on this particular income and they want to change careers, but they can't give up their income because that's providing for the household. So, and they can't take that pay drop from like 60 grand to 25 because of all these other things without downgrading their life. And it's the keeping up with the Joneses, I suppose. But in some cases, they're not even trying to keep up with the Joneses.
They've got themselves in a trap.
Yeah, in a trap. So it's difficult for people to do that. But I think sometimes you have to go back, take 2 steps back to go forward. Like the whole slingshot, you take a slingshot, bring it back, but then it fires forward.
Yeah, exactly. And oftentimes, sometimes that's just real, and there are real conditions that you can't step away from for that moment in time, and that's genuinely tough. But when I'm talking about the overperformance and the sort of revving in one place when you've completely lost connection with that, um, what I'm talking about is more our inability to accept the cost of what's true for us. That that's making me feel terrible. I don't want to do that anymore. But I'm going to get off the fast lane. I'm going to get off the track of, efficiency, productivity, optimization, endless sort of more and gain. I'm not going to be able to afford that car I thought I was going to get next year. It's kind of, um, it's accepting the cost to be truer. And once you are truer and more whole, my hypothesis is actually that's where we really go to the edge of our talents. It's kind of, constraint is a master of invention. Uh, that kind of orientation of like, if you are whole and a bit more spacious, a bit more able to access creativity, a bit more connected to life, the things that you are capable of will be way more accessible to you than if you're revving and it's all grit and gas and push and can't stop now.
Yeah, it's so interesting that there's so many sort of mentality blocks that cause our behaviour. Just a quick flip on something, instead of saying, I'm keep failing, 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 it's like, well, maybe I'm just iteration 700 of, and at 750, I will now be the person I need to be to actually maybe achieve this goal.
Right.
A world champion boxer's been punched in the face more times than anyone in this room, but they're better than we are
Yeah.
because they're willing to go through that in order to develop. And that is that process, I think, that people just
So
don't understand.
so that's it, you just use again the phrase of process, right? Evolution, ecology is process. Everything in ecology is process. Ecology doesn't sit and think about how bad the failure is and add shame. Shame is a completely human concept. Failure is a natural concept. Guilt is even a natural concept for humans, and that's fine. It's like, oh, I wish I'd not. There's something I regret. Um, but what we do is dwell in what's wrong with us, and it, I think we can be a lot more practical, a lot more pragmatic than that. Failure is a completely natural iteration. It's like, oh, that didn't work. What do I want to do with that? And the best of the best in the world have a relationship with failure that doesn't attach to shame. It's not I am less. It's like I am not quite at the right trajectory here, or that was version 17, and I need to move. What's version 18? How can I stay creative and inventive and open? How do I regenerate my mojo for what's next? That's why the whole rest of the book, the second half of the book, is committed to sort of this idea of regenerating within your life, not presuming you need to drop everything and make a new life. It's all just iteration. It's all just evolution and ecology. We are process.
I think the failure and shame thing's a really interesting point because if you think of like the major fears, fear of rejection, fear of failure, fear of success, fear of being judged by others, imposter syndrome, etc.
Mhm.
There's two of those that are aligned together: the fear of failure and fear of being judged by others. Because the shame is because you feel that the failure is making you be judged by others unfavorably, which is giving you that feeling of guilt, of shame. So I think that's quite interesting that you're tying those two together, saying actually maybe it's not a good thing that you are d- succumbing to those fears in such a way.
Yeah, I mean, my last book, Fear Less, How to Win at Life Without Losing Yourself, is a lot about that. And it's, that Brene Brown, the social researcher and podcaster and author and all the other amazing things, she talks about uh, guilt is I did something wrong, shame is I am wrong. Right. And there's a massive distinction there. Right. And that's why I say shame is man made, culturally made, narrative made. It's not helpful in any way. So, when you get sort of mired in the idea that you're not enough, and I talk a lot in the last book about not good enough fear and how that plays out in our life and what we can do to sort of diminish that and choose differently. When you get stuck there, you get really stuck. And it's something that is, you pay too much mental rent for that. You don't need to. There are many other types of genuinely high performance, regenerative mentalities for performance that can take you into a more pragmatic, active role where you've got agency, where you're in charge of what happens next within the collective of process, ecological process and life. So that's why I start with this idea that, like, you need an ecological mindset. It's like, yeah, you're going to evolve constantly, and some things are going to be uncomfortable. Like when a snake needs to shed its skin, it has to catch its old skin on a rock or a twig and pull it off. Basically, it's not comfortable to evolve. Very often, it's an uncomfortable process to shed and to change. But that's what we're capable of, and that's what's necessary if we don't want to stop and rev and get stuck.
I like what you said about the cost as well of your mental costs or whatever it may be, because if you do get a new job that's better paid, more responsibility, there is a cognitive cost to that. You are using more of your capacity of your brain, which may mean if you've got any other secondary projects you're doing, it's probably going to be harder for you to do that. More of your time has been used up. So sometimes we have to understand the actual total cost on a collective basis, like you say, everything is intertwined,
Yeah.
not just your bank account, but your psychological costs, your mental costs, your
Right.
fatigue
Right.
costs, all these sorts of things.
Yeah.
Like the whole wheel of life, isn't it? Career, business, health, family, friends, hobbies. Yes, for some people they say to be successful, you have to give up all the other things. If you're in the gym all of the time, you're probably going to be stronger than the guy who focuses on, you know, relationship building and all these other things. But who actually has the better life?
Right. And that's the question, right? That's the philosophical question at the basis of it. It's sort of like how many times you hear, like, okay, when a kid's sort of 14 or 15 and maybe they play soccer and rugby, it's going to be like, you're going to have to choose so that you can excel. So it's exactly those four narratives so that you can keep separating yourself out. You can become exceptional. You can optimize every minute in favor of you becoming special, exceptional, standing out. And it's not that that's wrong. It's that when that becomes a mentality for how we live rather than how we achieve a thing, a specific thing, that's where we go pear-shaped, in my view.
Yeah, it's difficult to navigate all of these things. I think people know stuff sometimes, but they don't always act on it. You might know that going to the gym 4 times a week is better than not going, yet you don't go.
Right.
It's all cognitive dissonance, isn't it? Either you change your opinion or you actually change your behavior.
Yeah. Well, this takes us back to sort of like, what do you do about it, right? And I think I talk about sort of coming home to yourself and getting honest, right? The cognitive piece of this, the reflective, critical analysis piece of this, get honest with yourself about how it actually is. Like, if you can ask yourself the question, okay, so I know 4 times might be good, but what's missing for me? Because the easy thing is to say is summing up with me. I lack discipline, whatever. But there's probably more to it than that. Maybe you don't have the mental space. Maybe your body's too tired. Maybe you're demotivated and you need a different kind of energy in your life in some other way. Maybe you need the shared relationship of go with somebody. There's something not there for you. But we turn it in so quickly on ourselves as something up with us rather than sort of, looking outward for like, what are the cultural conditions that are affecting my behavior? I think that's really important in that too. But it's, again, it's sort of that idea that we can, my sort of core four principles of regenerative performance. It's like we can do a lot within this frame to change it. And like even noticing, getting honest is one bit, but noticing how you're doing, rather than just overriding all the brilliant signals from a massively intelligent body. We just press override all the time. Like if your throat's scratchy because you're tired or you didn't sleep last night or your oven's not working or
Yeah.
whatever else, and you can't eat the way you want to, your body will give you constant signals, but we override them and keep doing what we'd planned to do instead of being in response to them. And therefore, we also override all the positive possibilities in that, right? So we just keep on track conformist, keep on track compliant to what we'd already planned in our mind, which is completely associated with mentalities and narratives. And I think, if we can come to presence more often and kind of like hand on heart, hand on belly, how do I feel? What do I need? And actually respond to that, we're in much better nick for what happens next.
100%. Like the 4 times a week at the gym, if you're not getting the results, you might think I need to do 5 days, I need to do 6 days. But I don't know if you've heard the story of the two lumberjacks.
Tell me.
So there's two trees, both lumberjacks. They're working 9 to 5, cutting down the trees. One guy goes away for an hour at lunch, the other guy cuts all day. And at the end of the day, the guy who took an hour lunch has cut more. And at the end of the week, the guy's like, I'm working more than you. How the hell have you managed to cut more than me? And he says, during the hour, I'll go home and sharpen my axe. And that's a lot of the time. It's not about more. You've got to look at where more needs to go. Maybe you need
Right.
more rest, better
Right.
diet, not
Exactly.
more in the gym, more weight,
Yeah.
risk of injury, blah, blah. Sometimes it's more in a different, it's a way that you're looking at
Different.
something that's important, I think, as
It's
well.
like I have that concept in the book of like the ultra processed mind and the sort of psychological microbiome. Like, what are we feeding ourselves? Is it the same diet constantly, mentally, habit wise, behavior wise? Is it sort of like a monoculture and like a bland vanilla diet, or are we able to spice it up here and there with difference? And I love that the way you describe that of like it's where you're applying the energy of more that matters. And the second of the core four principles is diversify your modes and speeds, right? And that's exactly it. It's sort of, if you're diversifying, then it's like, I need to apply my energy or my more in a specific place, because where I'm applying it, I'm revving, or it's slowing down. I think sometimes when we talk about doing too much or being overwhelmed or burnt out or whatever else, the antidote is just slowness, right? And slowness is really important. Space is really important, but diversity is even more important. So can you mix it up, or are you so rigid in your routine that you can't respond to your body, to your mind, to the environment? You can no longer respond because that's not ecological, right? If we're ecological beings, then we need to respond to the environment. We need to evolve and adapt and pivot all the time. That's what that is. So diversifying means, stop feeding that ultra processed diet, even if it is 4 times a week in the gym. Your gains will drop off if you start being bored or depleted or whatever else. It's like you might need to mix it up. And, the classic example in sports teams is like everybody thinks you have to just do more. And sometimes when the tone of it is like, I can feel a little bit tension coming in, a little bit of strain or boredom, which is a form of stress, you need to play. You need to mix it up in some way. It's like the diversity is critical for a fulfilling, spacious life in which you can perform regeneratively.
Diversifying means, not just focusing on this one thing, looking at other ways of doing things, or focusing on other things
Yeah,
in order to
right.
maybe achieve what you want to achieve.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, something creative, something that's just not on your regular list, and just like go explore. Just like allow yourself, inhabit yourself a bit and go explore, go feel what you need at any one point in time. Because sometimes it's not another workout. Sometimes, even though I completely respect the amount of discipline that's required to get to a particular physical point, psychology works differently to that. It's not compound gains. Your psychology needs diversity, not compound gains. And we treat it as if it's the same thing.
Compound gains is what everyone wants, though, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. And they're the narratives and that we talked about, at the start. But I don't think that they actually lead to the result that we're seeking. I think that diversity, space, mixing it up a bit is more powerful.
But then once you've mixed it up, and I think this is the way that humans work. If you mixed it up and you start to see results, and then you keep doing that thing for ages, and then you maybe need to re-diversify, but you're like, well, actually, I did it last time, and I found that this was the best way to be. But now, at this point, it's no longer the best thing to do anymore.
Yeah, and everything's moved, right? You've moved, the environment's moved, etc. It's Heraclitus. You'd never step in the same river twice
Yeah.
because you're not the same person and the river's not the same river. And it's the same thing, but if we could have that mentality of moving with life, in the sort of regenerative performance values, I talk about being in flow with life, and that's the thing. If you keep going back to this sort of image of what worked before or what was right before, I mean, we can say the same politically or in any way we look at that. The idea of retrospective moving is non-ecological. It's like you have to move forward. All ecology changes constantly. It's a principle of ecology. And it's like, what's my next shift rather than how do I get back?
It's a whole Taoist thing, isn't it? Wu Wei and Alan Watts talks about,
Yeah,
instead of rowing against the river, tack the boat,
yeah,
sailing boats. As you can,
exactly that. Alan Watts' new stuff.
yeah, I love Alan Watts.
It's
Do you
great.
know what it ruins it though? All this AI stuff. I like listening to like some of his long lectures and stuff, and there's so many AI videos of him that I know the difference.
If you know when he died, you know when, if it's supposed to have been last week, but a lot of people don't sort of know his body of work. So it
Yeah,
gets hard, doesn't it?
that's what I mean. So the newer people who are listening to it are going to find it harder and harder to differentiate. And I think this is one of the problems with AI anyway, and the internet, is that if at this point we can't always 100% tell what's real or not, what about in 5 years' time, 10 years' time?
Right. And that's part of that overwhelm that we talked about before, that sort of why it's so important to look after your own nervous system so you can start to distinguish a little bit and stay present so you can say, is that, is that kind of just like feeding? What kind of mental junk food is that feeding me? Or, how does that change something that I feel? Because it's so easy. anybody think about Alan Watts should go to Alan Watts Institute, which is his original piece, his original body of work.
Yeah, he's got so many good
It's amazing.
key things that he says, and very much like you said at the start. We are all the same. One of the things he's talked about, if I'm saying this right, is if the bees need the flowers and the flowers need the bees, are bees and flowers the same thing?
Right. Yeah.
Which I think is a beautiful way of putting it.
Yeah. Exactly. And it's he's coming from that real Taoist sort of perspective as well, which has got so much to offer. But even keeping it on a really sort of daily, pragmatic way, which I try and do in thinking about what is regenerative performance. That third principle, it's just a nice segue to that, is sort of that idea of seasonality and wild clocks. So wild clocks is a term that came from this brilliant guy, David Farrier, who he wrote an essay called Wild Clocks about how the pollinators are coming in at a different time to the flowers. With climate change now, the flowers are blooming at a different time to when the pollinators arrive, and they're missing each other, and species are suffering because of it, because they actually are symbiotic. They need each other. And I think we need to get back in touch with our own wild clocks in a different way of like, what is it that we need and when? So if you expect the same out of yourself in your 50s as you do in your 20s, you're not really in touch with your own seasonality or your wild clocks. It's not less, it's different. It's not, you know, it's not about dropping gears and just slowing down. It's like, what's right now, what's valid now, what's in flow now, what makes me vital now, keeps, where's my energy now? What do I want? But we don't do that. We just stay on a more conformist treadmill and just keep doing the same thing. And it's like we're totally out of touch with our own wild clocks and our seasonality. You still take your lunch break when your calendar says that you've got a gap, not when your gut tells you you're hungry.
Yeah.
Right? You still uh, work the same calendar across a year, whether it's dark at 4 o'clock in the afternoon or 10 o'clock at night. We don't respond to that because we're in an industrial mindset, and it's all about output. And I say we should have a better relationship to life and output through these sort of methods and thinking differently about that stuff.
I try and sleep with the curtains open now, like circadian rhythm. Get woken up by the sun. I know it's sometimes early, like getting up at 6 and stuff. You get naturally woken up, but as you said, it's living in you know uh, in line with
Rhythm.
nature. The
It's rhythm.
circadian rhythm, isn't it?
Yeah.
And it's all systems. Again,
Mhm.
same. You've got spring, summer, autumn, winter,
Yeah.
or fall for those Americans for autumn,
Mhm.
but there's a reason things happen. Things grow, they peak, they die off, and then it grows again next year.
Generates. Right.
And that's a cycle, the system, as you've mentioned, many times, which is exactly what it is.
Yeah, exactly. And we talk all the time about time, about like clock time, um, which is so different to seasonal time. It's the same 24 hours. It's predictable, etc. There's no need for response towards it. And we say, I'll make time for that. I need to make a bit of time for. And I always think we need to get closer to rhythm and space, and those two things are more have more possibility in them. If we find a bit more natural rhythm across a year, then you have your own spring where it doesn't have to necessarily coincide with the weather, but you have your own spring where you feel like fertile, productive energy, creative energy, and your own winter sometimes too, where it's like I need to be a bit more internal. But sometimes people are just psychologically indoors the whole time and just stuck with the clock. And that's industrial. And I think we've got room to move.
Again, coming back to one of the Alan Watts, now it's in my head, is we all love the peaks, but we have to understand that in order to have the peaks, you need the valleys as well.
Yeah.
And through life, you're going to go through bad periods. You can't always have this compound growth, up, 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 up.
Yeah.
And we're obsessed with growth. You look in newspapers, oh, it didn't grow this year. How can it grow exponentially every single time? A recession is 2 negative quarters of growth, and it's seen as a bad thing. Nothing is straight lines. It has to go up and down. A river meanders. It doesn't go, A to B. There's no straight lines in
Yeah.
nature, essentially.
Yeah. There's
But
no straight lines.
but we are so like, God, we've got a circle of the table actually. But yeah, it's crazy really that
Yeah.
that's how we think.
And like that's like you think about something like the way we approach economy. It's not very ecological yet. I think there's some shifts, some interesting things happening on the periphery, but we treat ourselves as human beings, our psychology in that way too. That is eternal growth is the point, and that's what I'm challenging. It's like what kind of growth? Like, are you allowed to go sideways? Are you allowed to wayfare? Are you allowed to go deeper? You could put down deeper roots. That's where you'll find your meaning. That's where you'll find your flourishing. It's the diversity of things instead of this one single life that is a push upwards. That's the opportunity to do it differently. And it does not mean that you have to drop the standard or achieve less.
So we talked a little bit about the body intelligence. How do we incorporate that then?
I mean, the four core four principles kind of work together. So a part of it's noticing, right? But your body tells you all day how you're doing, right? It tells you. I have started to really tune into body language and other people's body language and my own body language. Like, oh, I'm clenching my fists, like or I'm bracing. Like, what am I doing there? My jaws tight, or my tongue's on the top of roof of my mouth. What what's that about? And the Japanese have a beautiful saying. Their word for belly is hara, and the they believe that that is the source of intelligence. The main source of intelligence in the body is hara. And so first they ask what the gut thinks, which we know now is the same size brain and same capability of brain as the one in our head. The nervous system is a phenomenal network of intelligence and information in the gut and the pelvic area. But so ask, you can switch it up a little bit. One of the things you can do is like, so as I was saying before, like hand on heart, hand on belly, how do I feel? What do I need? And just listen for a minute. And the other center of intelligence is the heart. Like, what does your heart say about it? And the heart whispers instead of shouts. Your mind shouts. It's chatting at you all day. It's like 70 or 80,000 thoughts. Most of them are negative and repetitive. Right. So it's very dominant. But if you can just shush it for a minute and listen to your heart, it'll take a minute longer. What does that say about it? And if you do breath work, for example, which I do, big breath work, pranayamic breath work, like you crack your heart a minute. It's like, oh shit, there's so much feeling there that I hadn't given any space to, and then you have the opportunity to process it, to metabolize, to percolate, to let it flow through. So some traditions, Stoicism, as I mentioned earlier, being one of them, it's more like control your emotions. I'm saying process your emotions because that's what ecology does. There's no waste. Everything becomes something else. It's fertile ground. So the body's intelligence is a way of letting you know what's actually going on if you can tune in, and just notice what's even happening in your body.
The brain thing you said, or the mind, it has a feeling of separateness, doesn't it? It feels like it's the one in control, which, coming back to what your very first part of this is separateness isn't always a good thing. It should be collective. And actually the best thoughts or intuitions you have come from the gut. If something seems bad, you get the gut feeling.
Yeah, but we override it.
And yeah, we override it, but that is always the right one.
Very often the right one.
Yeah, very often, yeah.
But it's like intel. It's like we just dismiss the data. It's like, but it's good intel. And then you can add this brilliant prefrontal cortex that we have that lets you work. Like, let me analyze that, and you can when you can use them together rather than just dismiss the body. We treat our bodies like an Uber for our head, as if that's or it's a burden. It's a machine to keep in good order. But it's actually an extraordinary center of intelligence if you can tune in, and that's whole. I use the term whole being instead of well-being. Well-being it can be kind of compound gain, fix me, control, as much as it's got lots of good stuff too. It can be seen that way. Whole being for me is more like this ecological mindset where it's, I'm allowed to be all of it. I'm allowed to evolve. Sometimes it might be in a different direction.
Yeah, I think as humans, we need to have more metacognition, looking at ourselves from an external perspective and trying to see what we're like as well. Like, because that helps us to say, actually, like you said earlier, what am I? What is my body language doing? You have to be this external person outside yourself to start realizing these things.
Yeah.
But that then brings it back to the collective, doesn't it?
Yeah. It makes me think of the ubuntu that I spoke about earlier. And one of the practices that I read about within ubuntu is that if somebody has done the wrong thing in the community, um, we might shame them, punish them, tell them off, ostracize them. There's a downside negative to doing the wrong thing, right? A moral downside, and it goes with shame quite often. In Ubuntu, they would put that person in the middle of the circle of a collective of people, and every one of those people would tell that person why they're better than that. Right? Imagine that instead of sort of why you've done the wrong thing, which you already know.
Yeah.
If the feed, the nutrition that you were getting after an error was about why you're better than that, and what's already amazing about you that you can pick up and use. So I think there's different ways of doing it, right? The body holds emotion massively, which is why there's a whole chapter on trauma and the performer, and about how the body holds information and trauma. And we need to be able to let some of that go to come to that wholeness as well.
It reminds me of the stealing student, the Zen koan, where
Mm.
this guy, this sensei guy, this guru has got a school, and there's a kid that gets caught stealing, and all the other kids are like, he stole, he stole. The sensei guy, the guru, says nothing really, and then he does it again, and the kids are like, look, we need to get rid of him. He's stealing, he's stealing, he's stealing. He's look, you kids know right from wrong. This kid doesn't. You can all leave, but he's the one who needs the help. And I think that's a really amazing way to look at it.
Yeah,
Instead of
for
trying
sure.
to expel people, he's the one who actually needs the help. You
Right,
guys already know. You can go off. You've learned the lesson.
right.
He hasn't,
Yeah,
which I think is a great way, because most people would say, look, ostracize him. He's not listening.
yeah.
But this Zen koan shows it's the other way around. And like you say, diversify. Sometimes you've got to think a different way to get.
Different way,
Yeah,
exactly. That happens a lot in sports teams. If somebody's, I'm not talking about slacking in terms of performance, but slacking behaviorally, or something. Their behavior's not up to standard. Like really smart teams will do exactly that, and that's the holding moment. It doesn't mean there's no accountability. There has to be the learning and the accountability in it, but it's a time for holding, not a time for shaming and dismissing. I really wish we did that better as a collective.
even Harry again was saying this yesterday, where because I asked him about arguments within the team, etc. And he says, look, if someone has got a different way of thinking, instead of arguing, no, that's stupid, we say, look, we'll play it out. Let's try this idea. It's either going to be good, in which case we maybe adopt it, or it's going to be mediocre, where we take one thing from it, or it's going to be absolutely awful, in which case we can put this whole thing to bed.
Yeah,
Rather than argue, argue,
yeah,
argue, let's just play it out for a day.
that's great. That's really smart.
So I think that, and again, it's a different way of thinking, because most people would just argue and say, look, this is the way we're doing it. We've always done it this way. You shut the fuck up, basically,
Mhm.
and know your place, basically.
Yeah,
But
power control,
yeah,
superiority.
yeah,
They're so they work temporarily, right? But they're limited, and unlike the opposite, as you were saying, Harry spoke about, is it's that's so has so much more potential in it for getting an extraordinary result. That's what I really want to make that point with regenerative performance. It's definitely not less. It's like unleashing for more. We have to come out of those old dead ideas and narratives and beliefs about how we have to get there, because they don't really work, or they don't work without suffering and diminishment at too many levels. And I think we can do it really differently.
yeah. Because there's a principle, I can't remember the name. The only reason I know it is because I'm writing another book at the minute. So one of the things it says is that, imagine you've got a business, right, and the CEO thinks we've got all the compliance principles in place, the fairness principles, etc. They will never see it. The only people who can see it are the people on the ground. The employees can see the unfairness, the bias, the promotions. So sometimes you have to go, if even if you aren't, you have to take the viewpoint of the people on the ground. One of the reasons why Adolf Hitler lost the war was because when he tried to take Russia, the people on the ground were telling him, it's too cold in Russia, we need to retreat.
Yeah.
But he didn't listen to this feedback, like you said about the gut, the feedback, you're not listening to it.
Yeah.
And that's what, and I'm not saying he should have won the war, by the way, I'm just using
Yeah.
it as an
Yeah.
example.
Hmm.
That's why you have to take on board and not be this, I'm Mr. Billy Big Bollocks,
Yeah.
not listening. So
Yeah. I know, and like the reason people, I think it's interesting to sort of consider the reason people do that is because they've bought into the idea of their um, that they need to control what's happening next. They need to analyze, decide, know, control. We're so rubbish at not knowing, but there's a value to not knowing for a minute and thinking a bit deeper, like trusting other intel and from other people, from the climate, cultural climate and literal climate, from our gut, like listening and responding. It's a kind of a fierce composure that I think is really beneficial for performance.
we talked about whys earlier, and I want to get a why for obviously the book behind you. What was the reason that you wrote the book?
That's a good question. I think, well, an author quite often has quite a bit of their own story in what they write, and I'd been through a big burnout, and part the arc of this book is like overperformance, um, uh, mentalities, trauma history, getting honest, crashing and burning, getting honest, and then how to regenerate. And that had been my story to some degree after the sort of coming back to England and the football work and all the rest of it. I had a big burnout myself, and it taught me a lot. It amplified and emphasized and illuminated a bit of what I'd been seeing. But then over the last, post-COVID, particularly over the last few years, I've just seen it in so many people that are overperforming, and particularly clients. And I thought, there's something more here to add that's about how do we address this? Not just a managing burnout. I didn't want to write a managing burnout book. I wanted to be like, well, how do we regenerate? And in the last few years, I've sort of done a lot more studying myself in ecological psychology, as sort of a doctoral level study, and it just changed the way I think. And I wanted to bring that, merge that a little bit with more of my performance work. So, regenerative performance psychology is what came out of that, and that's why I offer the book.
Is that, did that, as well as the ecological side, did it come from, obviously you came back from Australia, wasn't it, back to
Yeah.
the UK? Would you think that was part of it? Because a lot of the time it's life, things that happen in life also that give us sparks or change our viewpoint on things. Do you think that was a big part of it as well?
Yeah, I mean, big transitions like moving country. I went from Australia to LA and then LA back here. And I had a little period in Denmark in between during COVID because I was commuting. And that was an easier place to base. And yeah. So there was a lot of my own transition that certainly sparked a lot of that thinking. But, but actually, the deep dive into the eco psychology work probably just expanded my way of seeing more than anything.
So what is the eco psychology for people who aren't really familiar with what it is? And if they do know, maybe they don't really understand it, because I think there is a difference between knowing something and understanding it.
Yeah.
I sort of know how a light bulb works, but do I really understand it
Yeah.
to that level? Is
Yeah.
probably not.
And maybe you don't need to understand it, in that depth. But I would describe. We've been talking about eco psychology for the last hour and however long. That's what it is. It's seeing in that way. It's understanding that we are a part of a living web. We are symbiotic with all the rest of life. We're intertwined with everything else, but we have human stories, human narratives that take us out of that naturalness. And if we reconsider the principles of ecology, it gives us a guide for how we might do better ourselves as a human race, both collectively on big problems, geopolitical problems, meta crisis kind of stuff, but also individually, in like our inner landscape matching our outer landscape.
So,
So,
so like we said off air before we started sort of recording, is society is just a collection of individuals, isn't it? So I think that the fact that you're saying that is one on a collective basis, but also internally,
yeah,
because if you sort the internal side out, and you've got 10 people living on a street who have gone from being individualist and aggressive and don't give a shit basically about other people to everyone starting to care, then collectively it gives that improvement, as you said, doesn't it?
Yeah, for sure. And it's like it is inside out work. One thing I would say though is that you can do both at the same time. Like you can have agency in the world and act in the world while you're working through your inner landscape. You don't have to do everything in order in a linear industrial fashion. You can it can happen at the same time. So starting to explore who you are as an ecological human is a really important part of how you're going to make change in the world anyway. So it's I mean it's a relatively new field, but it's only sort of 30 years old or something. But I just find it so powerful and probably the most whole and real thing that I've studied across my life.
It's so interesting though as well when you have a particular perspective, you are this person, and you learn about something new, and you completely change. It's like for kids, for example,
Yeah.
before they believe in Santa, they're this sort of innocent person, and then when they realise Santa's not real, sorry if there's any kids listening, probably not.
What?
um, but then they are different, completely different people. They understand how the world works a little bit better. Like parents have had to go to work and buy the presents, and maybe a little bit of that innocence is gone in some respects. But that also applies to education on the whole. You've now understood this slightly different perspective, and you are now a different person that then they behave differently. So I think it's so important the information we consume, the books that we read, the conversations that we have such a big impact on who we become moving forward.
Yeah, I agree. Psychiatry tells us that, the job of the parent is to disappoint a child at the rate they can handle. And it's kind of like it's like evolution, and it's the same thing. Like, it's not a wholesale change tomorrow. It's like how do we move at a pace and in a way that we can absorb, handle, process and grow. I'm definitely not anti-growth. I'm just anti-complete upward only, never-ending growth. I think growth and as in evolution and development is critical. So yeah, it's a different take, I guess.
It's to the extent of everything else, I think, is what you're saying. Just
Yeah,
upwards growth to the extent of everything. How your body's telling you certain things, the community, your inner feelings of contentment and joy, all these sorts of things. So I think that's a really important point. Is not to the detriment of everything else, but you're still saying growth is your pro
yeah.
growth essentially, which I
I'm
think is an
pro-growth.
important
Yeah, for sure.
distinction.
Yeah. I'm pro growth, I'm pro ambition, I'm pro competition. I think they're natural. Well, they are natural. They're part of the natural world. What I'm, if I talked about it ecologically, I'm not pro parasitic growth. I'm not pro endless self-interested growth. I think we can do better is the bottom line. We've got um, an opportunity to really recognize who we are and what we've got available to us to do it differently.
Do you think that society is going down the right path or the wrong path currently?
Ooh, that's a big question. I think it depends what lens you look at that from. If I think about it, how many extraordinary individuals are doing extraordinary things, and the lens is shifting. We don't hear a lot about that, right? That's not the mainstream narrative that we're swimming about in right now. It's doom, gloom, dissent, um, awfulness. I think we're definitely in a rupture, though, a moment in time where we're in a rupture. You know how a lake turns over and it's messy and it's muddy and silty until it resettles. I think we're in a period of that, but I also think that's necessary, both from an individual level, which is what I'm talking about here, but also culturally. I think there's a turning over, and there's always, like my comment before about the snake snagging its skin, it's not always comfortable to shift, to change, to evolve, to transmute into something else. In the book, the metaphor of the dragonfly, right? It's like that seems like an insane act for a dragonfly, which is an underwater, a grey underwater predator, sort of a nymph that lives under the water for a couple of years at least. And then in what seems like an insane act, it climbs up a reed, cracks open, in the sun after a couple of days drying and becomes what it always was. Um, as you know, the dragonfly emerges, what it was always going to happen that way, but it needed to go through something difficult for it to come about. I think that's kind of maybe what I'm getting at with the moment in time that we're in. I'm still in ecology. We wouldn't sort of rely on hope. We'd rely on trust. I still trust our capability. I still trust the ecological capability to find solutions, but we've got to behave differently to enable that and to free that up.
I love that. It's the whole Hegel's zeitgeist or geist, isn't it? That we are where we are. But I think, as you said, with the, whether it's a butterfly or whatever, sometimes we have to go through this bad situation in order to make the realization to improve later. It's like you've been saying all along. We can't just go linear, get better, more moral every time. You have to sometimes, things have to happen in order for you to realize something. Maybe you don't realize eating foods, processed foods bad until your electric hob breaks and you're having to cook fish fingers in the oven every day or whatever. So that then you've actually physically realized, wow. Or the flip side, going from McDonald's every day to eating, fresh fruit, vegetables, steaks, and all these sorts of things. It's actually the realization rather than just reading, eating this is good for you. Sometimes you have to actually go through the journey in order to actually have the realization of something.
Yeah, it's experiential. Um, it the reason it was a dragonfly, not a butterfly, like a butterfly, when it goes into a cocoon, it actually melts its whole form and a new form reemerges. Whereas the dragonfly it's a cracking open, its wings expand from the cocoon of its body. As it sort of becomes something that was entirely inherent. And I think we've got that same possibility of, like, whether it's feeding ourselves differently or whatever else. It's like recognizing, coming to presence, recognizing what's possible in me, what's nourishment do I need, and then unleashing what's already there. I don't think we need to become something else. I don't think we need a completely different human. I think that we need to trust what's already there and get the dross out of the way and the old ideas out of the way so that we can stand at our full height as part of the living web. I still believe in human beings, despite the evidence.
Yeah, and I think what you're saying is absolutely correct as well. To become who, instead of trying to be someone else,
Right.
be the best, version of yourself, because you're the only, Pippa Grange, Jeevan, whatever there's going to be. Individual fingerprints and
Right.
genetics, and
Right.
even snowflakes have their own individuality. Trying to, a lot of people try and be someone else
Something
or
else.
like something
Yeah.
else when they're introverted. Great, you get some fantastically successful introverts.
I'm
Extroverts the same,
introverted.
so it doesn't necessarily mean to say that you have to try and change. And I'm not saying that change is a bad thing, because we do have to adapt and look at ways to improve. But that, again, coming back to what you've been saying, it has to be within the right remit.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, what's the frame that holds all of that? What's the point? What's the better reasons to perform? What's the place of creativity? What's the place of community? What's the place of sort of your own vitality in that? Because they all get sidelined for upward, more optimized, urgent, and we crush out all the space where we can get to that stuff. So I think there's that's the turning for me. And I think we're doing that individually and culturally.
I think a lot of this stems from the school system, in terms of what we're taught at school that drives the perspective. Because, as I said, we're only the collection of all of the things that we've even taught, told,
Yeah.
learnt, and then we use that information to have a lens on what we see and how we act, versus you get this new piece of information, actually changes the whole dynamic. Like films, I can't think of an example off the top of my head, but when you're watching a film and one piece of information, like Shutter Island, for example,
Right.
one piece of information comes and you retrospectively look back at the whole film in your head thinking, wow, actually now it all makes sense. And I think that's such an important part, is that sometimes we only need a couple of bits of information to really change the or pivot, as you said, the trajectory of where we're going.
Yeah. Makes me think of Gone Baby Gone. Casey Affleck. It's always brilliant.
Oh, I
That's
have
like,
seen. Yeah, I have seen it.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
a couple of little bits of info, and you're like, ah, right, that's changes the whole shape, right? So, I can't remember what your first part of that of what you said there was. So
I
sorry.
can't remember either. Yeah,
It must have been good. We'll
yeah.
leave that one.
So what do you think in terms of future then for psychology in general? Do you think there's going to be a change towards this more ecological approach, or people still like work harder, grind harder? Do you think there is that transition in the Geist, as you said?
Yeah, I really hope so, but I think it will require people to get back in touch with what they think and feel actually and get really honest about it. My impression from my small platform is that people are absolutely craving it, absolutely craving the shift. That so many people are a bit overwhelmed, a bit too anxious to really enjoy their life and to relate to their life in a way that's useful. And I think there just needs to be a shift of some kind. I really think it starts with the nervous system coming back to the body, as I said, and just understanding that we've got so much choice here. We don't actually have to do it the way, the underwater nymph has done it before it became a dragonfly. We can be the dragonfly in that way. Your other question was about school.
Oh yeah, that was right.
Shall I go back to
Yeah,
it?
yeah.
Um, I feel bad for schools at the minute because I don't feel like they've caught up with the transition as an institutional sort of collective. They haven't been able to move quickly enough with the evolution that's happening socially and culturally, especially with AI and the digital landscape. I think they're really up against it, and education will probably shift really significantly because of that. But as it stands today, that schoolishness, that idea of complete betterment, the bell curve, the kind of how a person is graded or assessed as good, is too narrow. Even if a school is a great school and it teaches so much more about what it is to be a human, there's very few schools that teach ethics, few schools that teach ecology, us as ecology. The science in classrooms is still reductionist science, more or less, and especially you know, before it becomes postgraduate education or graduate education. So I think there's a lot to catch up with for schools, but absolutely from the age of 5, you're trying to get that gold star because that's going to get you the pat on the head. That's going to help you feel safe, like you belong, like you're loved, you're worthy. And I think there are so many more ways that we can access those things, all of which are utterly necessary for human flourishing. So it's not just about standing out, being special, being exceptional, being constantly at the top of the class with a gold star.
But on the flip side, schools now they don't give out medals all the time. They give out participation certificates or whatever. And I think on the flip side, that going too far that way
Right.
without showing, rewards for, good performance can have maybe a detrimental impact in its own right as well.
Yeah, I mean, I said before I'm pro competition, I think competition's a natural phenomenon, but our relationship to it is very skewed. So if you think, if we have a relationship with competition that says only the one who wins achieved anything, that's winning shallow. That's kind of a negative take on competition. The root word of competition has an old French origin and an old Latin origin. One of them, which I believe is the old French, is something like, actually, I don't know which way around they are. I can't remember which way around they are, but one of them is something like striving together or striving in common, which means um, I'm never going to achieve my best unless you're really pushing me. You're really on my shoulder, pushing me, which is competition, right? And it's for the collective possibility that I'm striving in the first place, right? The other one is more like rivalry, which is conquest over, which is for me to be the winner, you have to be the loser. And the West has taken that path, absolutely, of sort of rivalry-based competition, which means somebody's a loser, right? I think so. The participation certificate was an attempt at getting rid of some of the shame of the losing. It's so connected to everything else we've been talking about. But actually, if we could reframe competition to be testing our mettle, testing our common humanity and the celebration and the effort together, and one will pop out at the top, that's fine. That's great. As long as we don't have a view of winning that means everyone else is not worthy.
An example of this that always sort of blows my mind is, okay, in sort of combat sports or, rugby or football, yes, there's better teams, there's worse teams, but you can compete to see who's going to win. With things like athletics, you know that you can't beat Usain's Bolt time of like 9.7 or 9 point whatever the time is. It must be so difficult to sort of gear yourself up, knowing that the chance of you winning is zero. But then I suppose this comes back to what you said. Is it not? It's doing it for the collective, not just about the result of it. So, what's your view on that? Like,
Well, some of it is for your result too, because I mean, if your only benchmark is whether you beat Bolt, then c- drop out now, sort of thing. I think somebody just got close, didn't they? But anyway, um, the but it's like, what is the best possible thing that you can achieve? What is your win? And just without sort of diving too far into the England stuff, like England didn't actually, in 2018, the whole country felt differently about that performance and that experience, that relationship between the England men's team um, and the community, the community of England. Um, but they still didn't win. They lost the semis, right? So it's not just the scoreboard that determines what winning is, in my view. It's like that. Of course, you want the scoreboard win. Of course, that would have been even better if it had gone all the way. But it didn't take out the worth or the value in that. There were so many other upsides, and I think it's an expansion rather than a reduction that we need when it comes to why do we compete, right? Some people like life without competition would be pretty dull. We're ecological beings. Ecology competes. It also cooperates. It also collaborates. It doesn't have to take out all the worth.
yeah, 100%. And competing against yourself, I think, is the battle. If you end up beating other people in the process, brilliant. But if you can't go against yourself in terms of competition, but as you said, collaboratively, we can get everything on board. It's and you're always looking external. How can I beat this person? Maybe that's not the best mentality to have in life generally, and specifically within sports.
Well, I think conquest mentality is just limited. Like there might be, there's a place for it in the, 20 minutes in the second half sort of thing. It's like where you're really driving hard. Your blood's up, you're passionate, you want it, or on the mat or whatever else. Um, you want to win the battle. That's the problem is when that mentality comes off the mat, and it's how you live your whole life that conquest over is the only win. And I think that's a problem. And also, you'll fail most times, right? Most people aren't Usain Bolt.
Mm.
Most people will fail most times. So, what else will we draw on to find our value and our virtue? And still celebrate those extraordinary humans who do something special. It's 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 a broadening out, I think, that's required. And you can compete really hard, and that was the best you possibly could give at that moment. That's an amazing thing. That's you know we celebrate that all the time, and that's what actually moves us as human beings. Seeing the endeavor and somebody really left it out there. It's not just the excellence on the scoreboard.
But what about for those people who have used that mentality to win things like I hate myself unless I win, and it's brought them success, but then in life then they carry that through and
Oh,
then they have that future uh sort of lack of contentment inside because it's always chasing that next thing as you
right.
talk about in the book,
Mhm.
chase, 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 chase,
Mhm.
chase. At what point does that stop? Getting over the finish line, I think, is one of the things you talked about.
Yeah, but as you pointed out in your example before, like getting over the finish line isn't a guarantee that that feeling will stop. And when I work with athletes or high performers in other fields, I really try and broaden out their view of how they'll evaluate themselves and their life. And like it's all about relationship. what are they in relationship to, and who are they in relationship to? It's like what is it that you're actually chasing with the idea of glory and assailable, um, heroic, untouchable sort of status? What is it that you're actually looking for? What's under that? And it's that feeling of like being lovable. You talked before about the things that we fear most, which are sort of in if you group those together, it's being abandoned or dying, our own mortality. There are two greatest fears, like the particularly with abandonment, which shows up in contemporary life more as sort of like, will I belong? Will I feel worthy? Will I fit? Or will I be on the outside? That's what we're looking for. And so because we're so mired in those narratives of superiority and specialness, exceptionalism, we think that getting that is going to give us love. But actually all the other ways that we compete together, lift together, relate to, I use the example, if you won a World Cup and the stadium's empty and nobody turns the TV on, does it feel the same? No, right? Because it's about love at the end of the day, and it's the mental freedom to have that in your mind and still fight hard, still pursue passionately, still compete with everything you've got. That's the blend that we're looking for.
So relationship wise, it seems that it's the relationship with yourself that's the most important. But that chasing of that love, do you think that maybe comes from childhood issues where you've not had the love that you maybe needed, which is why you're then chasing this validation externally of performance or results that you feel is going to replace that?
Sometimes it's not causal necessarily in that way, but I think that certainly is part of it. So I think that all of us, the script that we're given culturally and narrative wise, is that you need to be amazing, you need to stand out, when actually what we really need is to fit in. So I think culturally and mentality wise, that drives it most. If there's trauma in the family, or if somebody's experienced trauma that they've absorbed as I'm not really worthy, then that amplifies. I see it as sort of an amplification of those narratives and mentalities of like, no, I'm not going to be good enough, and not good enough means I'll be abandoned or cast out or not loved in some way. So it can drive it really hard. In the book, there's a whole chapter on trauma and the performer and what that feedback loop looks like for people. But it's an amplification rather than necessarily a cause.
I like the cause thing that you said, because there is a causation fallacy, correlation causation fallacy, where just because there's a correlation doesn't mean that it was actually the cause of
Right.
something, even though there is that pattern.
Yeah.
Whereas a lot of the time they say, oh, the pattern is this. These athletes all did that. Maybe it's this exact thing that happened that caused it. Not necessarily.
Yeah. It's like there's a lot of research on adverse childhood experiences, ACE, and the sort of shallow headline about it is that if you've had adversity in your childhood, it'll make you tougher and more resilient as an adult. Not necessarily. That's not causal. You needed that young person to be able to have a way to make meaning, to find a safe foothold. It's usually been lots of adult presence that's helped them be able to do that, or experiences that have helped them rewrite some of that script from their adverse childhood experiences. It's not an A to B causality.
Yeah, people always do that as well, don't they? They see something and say, "Oh, it must be that." Like if you're an alcoholic, they say, "Oh, his dad drunk. Oh, it must be that."
Yeah,
Or he doesn't
yeah,
touch alcohol. Or his dad was an alcoholic. Oh, it must be that. So
yeah,
which you're just making a correlation
yeah,
there, or causation, just
yeah,
because of something that happened. And
yeah. But
people tend, it's a psychological thing, isn't it? You
yeah.
want to create a course or something
Well,
where
we don't love complexity, do we? So we try and simplify so that we can hold meaning. But again, it's like there's just that drop down a little bit further into sort of the next layer gives us a lot more possibility for that. It's correlation's a good way of looking at it.
so where can people find your book if they I wouldn't
Yeah,
know.
I mean, there's an audio book and the hard copy, and any of your local places you normally would get your books. I'm not going to say Amazon,
Yeah.
but wherever you get your books, you can find it.
Well,
It's out.
thanks for being a fantastic guest.
Oh,
I
thank
really
you.
enjoyed the
Yeah, me
conversation.
too. It was really great. It's fantastic.
Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much.